If we're going to reverence our husband, then that means that we admire him exceedingly. That means we go beyond the limit in regarding him with wonder or astonishment and have an enthusiastic appreciation for him. So this is just like the Shulammite said, 1 in 10,000. We have this kind of attitude. You can just line up the best that there is, and you can pick our beloved out in a minute because he is 1 in 10,000. I want to tell you about a story about a lady who had this quality more than any lady I have ever seen. This lady met her when my husband and I lived in Spokane. And this man and his wife came over to visit us one evening and to have supper with us, and we had never met this couple before. And in the course of the evening, as we were talking to this couple, it soon became very obvious that this woman really had mastered this quality of reverence more than any woman had seen prior to that or have seen since then. This man, if you just saw him walking down the street, you would just think he was an average man. He was average height, average build, just an average man. But the woman that he had married was really quite a tall woman, probably taller than he was, and she was a very large woman. And in order to help you understand how large she was, her husband told a story about her stupid mother. Now it seemed that her stupid mother was always causing marriage problems for them, always causing problems. And he just told us this story to give us an example of how her mother was always causing problems. It turned out that this wife had been in the hospital, and so her stupid mother had bought her a size 54 dress when all she needed was a size 44. So her stupid mother couldn't even get the dress size right. So you get the idea of how large this woman was. She dwarfed this man. She made this average-looking man look like a little shrimp. And this when you saw the two of them together. And in the course of the evening, as we were talking with them, they told about how they had met. He told about how he had been raised in the church, but she had not been. She had neighbors down the street that used to come by and pick her up and take her as a teenager to church. And this fellow says, yeah. He says, me and my buddy, he says, we'd see her and we'd say, boy, that's a big girl. And of course, you can imagine, knowing boys, you can imagine they probably said some pretty unflattering things about her. But she looked over at him very sweetly and she says, yes, but you never dreamed you'd end up marrying me, did you? And as the evening wore on, it became very clear to us why he had married this woman. It's because she knew what reverence was all about. As we were sitting there and visiting, she began to tell him. She'd say, oh, tell him about 19 so-and-so when you were first in line to get the season hockey tickets. And she shut up and she listened with this look on her face like, boy, this is going to be great. And he began to tell us this story about how he had gone real early in the morning to get season hockey tickets, and he was first in line, and he got his picture in the paper. And so, boy, that was really great. And she says, oh, and tell him about 19 such and such. And she shut up, and he told us about the next year. The next year, he knew he was going to have to go earlier than ever because people were going to be trying to beat his record. So he went the night before, took a sleeping bag, and took games. But he was only third in line that year. And then after he finished telling that story, she says, oh, and tell him about 19 such and such. And we listened to every year for I don't know how many years as he would go out and try to be first in line to get the season hockey tickets. And she'd just sit there and look like, oh, isn't he wonderful? And of course, we're just sitting there, we're just bored to death. And she'd say, oh, and tell him about so-and-so's wedding. And he'd tell us all about their wedding. All these details that nobody, except the mother of the bride, cares anything about. And that's all our evening was listening to hockey stories, getting the tickets, and all the weddings that he had helped plan. And we were just bored to death. But this man, as you saw him there, his wife was sitting there. Oh, isn't he wonderful? He goes out and he conquers the hockey lines. He goes out and he helps everybody have these fabulous weddings. Isn't he wonderful? He's my hero. And it was obvious why this man had married her, because she knew how to reverence him. She knew how to make this little man that she made look like a shrimp be a giant in her eyes. And so this woman, she knew what reverence was all about. And let's look at that definition again. Admires him exceedingly. Go beyond the limit in regarding him with wonder or astonishment and an enthusiastic appreciation for him. You could hear it in her voice. You could see it in her eyes. You could see it in her expression. All of this quality here she had mastered. Then if we're going to reverence our husband, it means we adore him. As I said earlier, it means we express admiration, devotion, and affection. We let him know that this is the way we feel about it. We express it and we're verbal about it so that he is able to know that this is the way we truly feel about him. Then I have down here, these are some kind of governing things on our reverence for our husband, is that reverence must be honest. If it is not honest, it's going to backfire and it's going to cause problems. In Proverbs 7, verses 21, and then Proverbs 28, verse 23, these are both passages that talk about the harlot or the strange woman. These women know how to use flattery. All men need reverence. All men need admiration. And the harlot, she knows how to take advantage of a man and how to manipulate him through dishonest reverence. And so as wives, remember the Shulammite? Milk and honey were on her tongue. Milk, the life-giving substance. We talked about honeycomb. Last week was part of her tongue. She was honest. She was genuinely involved with her husband. And so this reverence needs to be honest. I had a gal in my class one time who told me this story about herself earlier before she came to class. She had learned in a previous set of classes that she needed to admire and reverence her husband. And this young girl hadn't been married very long, and she's always going around telling her husband, I love you, I love you, I love you. And she'd get no reaction, no response from him. And then she learned in class she needed to admire her husband. So she went up to him and she says, I really admire you. And he lit up. She got a response from him, and he said, why? But she didn't have anything to tell him. She didn't know why. She was just manipulating him. So you can imagine what kind of problem that created. So our admiration needs to be specific. Here it is, he finally got what he wanted from her, and he wanted to hear a little bit more, and there wasn't any more back there. Okay, then we also need to keep in mind that bad language hinders proper attitudes. The way we talk to our husband, the way we talk to our children, the language we use is going to affect our emotions and our feelings for them. In James 3, verse 6, this is where it talks about how that our world is set on fire by the tongue, that our tongue just stirs things up. And bad language is something that really has a tremendous effect on us. I know one woman always went around and called her daughter tacky. This was kind of her pet name for her daughter, was just tacky. And her daughter grew up with a very low self-image, and I suspect that what her mother called her had a lot to do with that, had a lot to do with the way she viewed herself. I listened to a man one time using himself in a sermon and talking about kind of how men think and how they dream, and talked about this girl driving up and calling him, oh, you big gorgeous hunk. Well, this is something that appeals to a man, to be called a hunk or a big brute. These are terms that are masculine and manly, that a lot of times the men like these type of terms. So we need to look at our language. What kind of words and names do we have? Do we have names that complement their masculinity, or names that are making fun of them? Several years ago, there was an article in the newspaper where it was either the man had killed his wife or the wife had killed her husband. I don't remember which it was. And in the paper, they interviewed the son. And the son said, for years, I have been hearing my mother and dad tell each other, I'm going to kill you. And so for years, this had been their language every time they'd have an argument. I'm going to kill you, until one day, one of them did kill the other. There was an article later about two brothers that used to, every time they would have a fight, say, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. And what they were doing was conditioning their minds until one day they did have a fight and one of them did kill the other. So we need to recognize that our language has a lot to do with our feelings. It has a lot to do with our emotions, and we need to protect ourselves from bad language and protect our family from bad language. Then we need to realize that all men love admiration, regardless of their age. And let's turn over to Proverbs 20, verse 29, because this will tell us what to admire about men. In Proverbs 20, verse 29. Okay, here it says, the glory of young men is their strength, and the honor of old men is their gray hair. If you're looking for something to admire in a young man, then you admire his strength, because this is something that young men are very proud of. I remember many years ago when my husband and I lived, I guess the first time we lived in Seattle, the Seattle area, we had some company over for dinner. And we were all sitting around the table, and my husband was busy telling stories. And as we were listening to the stories, well, it was getting hot and stuffy. So I thought, well, I'll just get up and go raise a window and not bother him because he's right in the middle of a story. So I got up and went over to raise the window, and I just strained as hard as I could and just kept straining until I thought I was going to break something in myself, and finally had to give up because I just could not budge that window. So finally I went and got him and said, will you please come open this window for me? So he goes over there and he goes, just like that, and he's got that window open. I said, boy, you must be 10 times stronger than I am. And he said, don't you ever forget it. And so what I did after that was, of course, I laughed like you did, is I would tell that story to different people. Just another way of admiring his strength is tell that story, and also could have an opportunity to admire his wit. So young men do glory in their strength. This is something they're very proud of, their ability to do things. We've talked about in earlier classes about how they do have a lot more strength than we do. But then it talks about the glory of old men. It says the honor of old men is their gray hair. We talked about how that a man is 63 still has more strength than a young girl of 16 or 18. He's still got a lot of strength, but he does not have the strength that he had in his youth. He does not have the strength of young men. And so his glory, his honor, is his gray hair. And of course, gray hair is a sign of wisdom. His ability to make wise decisions, his ability to think through things clearly. And one area a lot of times where men excel is in the area of finances. If a woman has got a man who is financially responsible, then she needs to go home and hug his neck and tell him how much she appreciates him, how much she admires him for that, because all women do not have husbands who are financially responsible. This is something that is a good quality in a man. So these are things that God is telling us that we can admire. Yes?
You know, even teenage boys, we have one that's a teenage boy, and they're always coming to you, oh, look, Mom, look how, leave my arms out, so you have to squeeze their arms and say, oh, wow, you're really getting strong, and
yeah.
He's stronger than I am, so that.
Okay, good. And then this is something boys come to their mothers for a lot, is this same admiration. And when they stop coming to us, we know they're getting it somewhere else then, don't we? Okay, and as we think about how all men love admiration, this is not something that's bad, because this is just one way that men are in God's image, because God wants our admiration. In Ephesians 3:10, this is where it says that God created the church so that the angels could see his wisdom. And in Philippians 1:9 through 11, and then in Philippians 4:6, this is where God wants our admiration. So for our husbands to need and want admiration, then that's just part of the way that they are in God's image, and that this is something that really is a good quality, something that we need to appreciate and that we need to take care of. A lot of times women say, well, if I admire my husband, then he'll just get the big head and he'll just be hard to live with. Well, anytime a husband gets the big head, that is a real good indication that he is starved for admiration. He is starved for this type of affection and admiration from his wife. And the way to solve that problem is to just keep giving it to him and keep giving it to him. And when you finally have given him enough, he won't have a big head anymore. He'll be a lot more pleasant to live with and be prospering from this admiration. Now, your assignment, and I'm not giving you the assignment to write down, I'm just telling you about it at this point. Your assignment is going to be to look for things to admire in your husband and your sons. And really, we do not have to be very smart to find things to admire in our husbands or our boyfriends or our sons. All we have to do is listen. If we will listen, they will tell us the things that they are proud of, the things that are important to us. And your assignment is going to be to look for things, and then when we come back to class next week, we're going to go around the room and we're going to let everyone tell one thing that they found during the week to admire, either in a son or a boyfriend or their husband, because it'll give all the rest of us some ideas too. One lady came back to class, and this was her story. She said her husband came in the house and he asked her to come out to the garage with him. And so she went out to the garage with him. He asked her to get in the car with him, and he got in the car, and she sat down beside him in the car. And all he did was just reach over and flip on the radio. He did not say one word. He just turned on the radio and it began to play. Well, she knew that the radio hadn't been working, and that was his way to say, look, hey, I fixed the radio. Can you fix a radio? So she began to brag on him. Boy, you fixed the radio. I bet that was really hard, and bragged on him, and he just beamed, and he really appreciated it. So all we have to do is listen. If we listen, our husbands and sons and boyfriends, they will come and they will tell us what it is that they want us to admire. The other day, my husband, of course, if you know my husband, how he's involved in computers, one of the things that he frequently comes and tells me about is some new computer program he's installed or something he's learned to do, something to do with the computer. The other day he came and he started to talk to me about the computer, some new program he'd gotten, and I was involved in doing something else, and I didn't put it down and really listen to him. I just went on doing, and he's talking to me. In a little bit, I realized he'd stopped talking, and he was really looking at me, just real, not sternly, but just real seriously, just looking at me. And I thought, uh-oh, he's told me something important, and I haven't been paying attention. So my mind did a replay of all the things he'd been saying to me so that I could properly admire him and ask him some questions and so I could appreciate him even more. And once I did that, well, then he got a happy look on his face and finished telling me what he had to tell me and went on his way happy. But I thought, boy, I nearly blew it. There he was expecting a response from me, and I was so busy doing what I was doing that I nearly blew it. So we need to take advantage of these opportunities, put down what we're doing, give them our undivided attention, and really listen. Now, several years ago, and talking about admiration in teenagers, several years ago when Fascinating Girl came out, she talked about teenagers admiring their boyfriends. And as I've said, a boy will not marry a girl who does not admire him. Once these girls who were taking Fascinating Girl learned how vulnerable boys were to admiration, they started going around school just admiring every boy they ran into and breaking all kinds of hearts and just causing all kinds of problems. So, a word of caution to the teenagers. It is the harlot and the strange woman that goes around throwing around insincere flattery. Insincere flattery can get you into a lot of trouble. It can cause boys or men to get emotionally involved with you when you do not want a relationship with them, and it causes problems. So we need to be sincere, and we need to be considerate in the way that we treat men in this regard. I have down here, if you can see, green sometimes doesn't show up very good, that love and reverence are God's perpetual motion machine. Now, scientists say they can't invent a perpetual motion machine, but I think God has created one in the realm of love and reverence. And one of your chapters you're going to read, the man's key is love, as we talked about earlier there in Ephesians 5:33, that if someone in the marriage will decide to start doing their part, whether it's the man to love his wife and not be selfish, or the wife to reverence her husband, then that is going to generate a response, and that marriage is going to get better and better, and I'm going to show you how in just a minute. But generally I have down here, if we fail in our lack of reverence for our husband, then so will the man. And if we succeed in our attitude towards him, then generally so will the man. Reverence is just something that I can't emphasize too much how important it is. This is a picture from your book, but I want us to go over a little bit of God's perpetual motion machine. See up here, a young couple, they get married. You see the love shining in her eyes. She's got this reverence for her husband. Here it is, they're really happy, and boy, things are really going great. One day he comes home from work, he's had a bad day, and he says some little ugly thing. It's not necessarily a reflection on her, just a reflection of the day that he's had. She takes it personally, and her feelings are hurt. So she's a little bit cold to him, and he's wondering, what in the world did I do, and why is she acting that way? Then they have some words, and time goes on. Their relationship is not quite the same as it used to be, and there's not this love and devotion between them that there used to be. Here it is, she's unhappy, she's sad. He's unhappy, he's sad, because this admiration, this love and devotion that they had up in the beginning is no longer there. One day, she decides to turn to God's Word to find a solution to her problems. She learns about reverence, that she's going to express her admiration and admire the things in him that she needs to. So here it is, she's expressing her admiration for him and letting him see her reverence. But you can see how he's skeptic. He's not really responding to that. But she's not giving up. She's just continuing to show this adoration and admiration for her husband, and we see that he's starting to respond a little bit. And here finally is, he really responds, and he's truly responding and more interested in his role and what he can do. And what happens in God's perpetual motion machine, once a woman sets it in force in her marriage, regardless of where she is in her marriage, the man is going to respond to it. The normal man is going to respond to it. And this is, once the woman sets it in force and the man starts to respond to it, then that makes the woman want to reverence her husband all that much more. And when she reverences him that much more, then he responds that much more. And then she reverences him more, and then you have a continuous cycle of where love and reverence is just getting more and more, until finally one day a woman says, I can't believe this is my marriage. I can't believe that we really have this relationship with each other, because it's just not possible for things to be this good in a marriage. I want to show you a few little cartoons about reverence, and then we'll take our break. Here's the family circus. And the little girl is telling the little boy, God made daddies tall so that we can get things from the top shelf. So this is one way we can admire our husbands. They can reach things. They can open pickle jars. They can do things for us that we don't have the physical ability to do. Here's a little cartoon. It goes on in the office. Surely this doesn't go on in anybody's home. She tells her boss, says, here you are, Mr. Treadwell. I corrected your grammar, spelling, and thinking. So sometimes this is the way wives treat their husbands. Okay, here's another one. I love this one. He's rowing her out in the middle of the lake. You see the cement on her feet. She's all tied up. And what does she say to her husband? You'd think she'd learn. Instead, she says, you're holding the oars wrong, stupid. So it's not too hard to figure out why it is he is dumping her. Now, I didn't intend that as a pun, but I guess it was, huh? Okay, before we quit, one quick newspaper article here. It says, when older men marry younger women. So this article is all about why it is older men marry younger women. And here's one man explained. He says, it's not only that her body turns me on, explained a Los Angeles dentist who recently married a Jennifer, and they used the Jennifer to be the expression of the younger woman. He says, it's an attitude of youth, her spontaneity, her spirit, but most of all, she adores me without judgment. Who wants to be with someone judging them all the time? Other men I interviewed agreed. It wasn't just the look of youth they were after, but the attitude of youth, openness, innocence, unscarred emotions. As 48-year-old Alex Walters, who married 23-year-old Beth, put it, life hasn't had time to injure her, so she's up about everything. I'm not a projection screen for all her past hurts with men. And most important, it's love without judgment. Call it adolescence, but what I want at this time in my life is uncritical love. Middle-aged men want uncritical love. And so here it is, the thing that makes older men marry young women is because these young women still have this attitude of admiration, this charm. They haven't lost it, and so they're out looking for young women who can admire them and who can appreciate them, qualities that perhaps their wife has lost and caused them to be turned off. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Okay, let's get back to the Song of Solomon now. Let's go back to, if you remember where we are right now, she's talking to the maidens. She's told them to go get the shepherd. They want to know why. Why is he special? And so she has said he's outstanding among 10,000. She has described him from the top of his head to the tip of his toes. And we're going to continue looking at her description of him in chapter 5, verse 16. Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16, and she said, his mouth is full of sweetness, and he is wholly desirable. So everything about him, he's full of sweetness, the way he talks to her. And this is something that is important. Just as we talked about in an earlier class, that I said before I had taken the training at the women's shelter that I really didn't appreciate how that the shepherd, that if you married someone like the shepherd, you were going to avoid marrying someone who's going to be involved in different types of wife abuse. This expression, how that his mouth is full of sweetness and he is wholly desirable, these are expressions that you're not going to be saying about a boyfriend who is going to turn out to be a wife abuser. He is not going to be having these characteristics. Now, I've got a couple of Dear Abby things that I want to read to you that just illustrate this point. The first one here to Dear Abby, it says, Dear Abby, I'm 19 years old and have dated this one guy for 3 years. Since that time, we've done nothing but fight over stupid things. I'm naturally very outgoing and I enjoy being around people. But in the last 2 years, all that's changed. My boyfriend is 4 years older than me, and he hates to be around people. He's jealous and forbids me even to look at other guys in public. He accuses me of seeing other guys behind his back, even though we're together 7 nights a week. He gets mad if I wear clothes that show my legs because he doesn't want any other guys to see them except him. He doesn't have any friends and doesn't want any. He has bruised my arms, torn my clothes, and called me every dirty name in the book. When he gets upset about anything, he takes it out on me. But for some crazy reason, I love him. We are supposed to get married in March, but my friends tell me I'll make the biggest mistake of my life if I marry this guy. What do you think? And signed it, Second Thoughts in Illinois. Dear Abby says, Dear Second Thoughts, you are wise to have second thoughts, and you'd be wiser still to have third and fourth thoughts. Please read the letter you wrote to me and then ask yourself how you define love. The guy you love is abusive, possessive, jealous without cause, controlling, and selfish. Is this the man you want to spend the rest of your life with? Think about it. Okay, this letter came out in February. 2 months later, in April, here's another letter in Dear Abby. And the lady says, Dear Abby, I just finished reading the letter from the 19-year-old who signed herself Second Thoughts in Illinois. So that's the letter we just read. She says, Abby, I could have written that letter myself. I'm also 19, have gone with a guy for nearly 3 years, and we plan to be married soon. But I, too, have second thoughts for the same reasons. He's jealous, doesn't trust me, accuses me of going out with other guys, and we fight a lot about stupid things. I like people and enjoy having friends, but he always wants me to be with him alone. Lately, he has cursed me, accused me of going out on him, and has hit me. Then he cries and begs me to give him another chance and swears he'll never do it again, but he does. My friends tell me I'll be sorry if I marry him, but Abby, I truly love him. Can you tell me why women go right on loving guys who treat them like dogs? Second Thoughts in Texas. Dear Second Thoughts, first, what's to love about a guy who treats you like a dog? And what's to love about a guy who doesn't trust you? Many human emotions are involved in what we call love. First, there's a strong sexual attraction. There's pity. I hate to hurt him. And security. Finding another guy may not be easy. Also, there's the addiction factor. Being with someone exclusively can become a habit. My advice to you is to have second, third, and fourth thoughts, then say goodbye. It's a major mistake to marry a man who is physically abusive. He will only get worse. So, of course, these gals could not describe their boyfriend's mouths as being full of sweetness and being wholly desirable. Here's another article where a lady wrote in to a psychologist, and here's her question. My husband and I got married 4 years ago after we had gone together for about a year. I'll be honest. I knew he had some problems. He drank, gambled, and even caroused too much some of the time. But I figured I'd be able to get him to cut down on these things after I married. You guessed it. I haven't been able to change him, and I'm frustrated and unhappy. What can I do? So here's the answer. It says, you probably knew that I'd respond to your question by telling you that you cannot change your husband, that only he can change himself, and that he has to want to make that change. And then he says, you could ask, demand, or even the dreaded nag him to go to a marriage counselor with you. says that effort will likely meet with the same resistance your other pushes have produced. If you feel that therapy would help you, consider seeking therapy for yourself without any attempt to have him go with you. He may decide to join you in your progress along the way, either out of a desire to improve things or merely out of curiosity, or he may not join you at all. So here it is. This therapist is saying, women marry a man with the idea, I'm going to be able to change him, but he's saying that you can't. You marry him for what he is instead of what it is that you think he is going to be. In a little survey I handed you out to fill out, you're going to have a question on there that asks you about how does he act behind the wheel? How does he drive? And this is something that isn't something that I read in the manual at the women's shelter in California. This is just something that as I have been listening to women talk over the years, and as I have had women fill out this survey when they are involved in an abusive situation, that in every case that I know about, when I have asked about what is he like behind the wheel. When he gets behind the wheel, he is an abusive driver. He is saying bad things about other drivers. He's very impatient. Many of these women say that they feel like their life is at stake when they are riding with him. One woman that I talked to, she said that her husband, she was in the process of leaving him because he had been abusing her for years, but then now he was starting to abuse their children and had broken their daughter's wrist. And I asked her, I said, what is he like behind the wheel of a car? And she says, just the other day when we were riding with him, she says he was riding behind this lady and just cursing at her. And he was so angry and frustrated because of the way she was acting that from his viewpoint of the way she was acting, that when they stopped at a red light, she was afraid that he was going to get out of the car and go up and physically or verbally abuse another lady that was in another car. And so she was talking about how terrified she was to ride with him. And it was interesting to me as I have done some of the research on Victorian morals and read some of the manuals that were written around the turn of the century, back before men had cars, that abusive men were recognizable for young ladies who were contemplating marriage by the way they treated their horses. One writer advised, young ladies, see how he treats his horse. Does he whip it and drive it unmercifully? If he does, as you can be assured that he is going to drive and abuse you just like he does his horse. So the way men treat their horses or their cars is a real good indication of how it is they're going to treat their wives, because it is a good indication of how they handle their anger. So if a young girl is dating a man who is abusive behind the wheel, then she needs to start asking some questions. Asking him how he deals with his temper. Ask his mother. Ask his brothers and sisters. How does he deal with his temper? And it's a problem she needs to face and deal with right then, because it's something that, in fact, an older lady was talking to me the other day who's had some examples of abuse in her marriage, and I asked her if she had seen any of this in courtship. And she said no, she thought he was a very kind man. And when I asked her how he was behind the wheel, then she says that he was someone that she was afraid to drive with, and she wished she had known this characteristic because she was trying to make an intelligent choice. So it's something that we need to be aware of. Can we say that his mouth is full of sweetness? Can we say that he is wholly desirable? If he is, then this is a good thing. Then as she continues, and she says, at the end of verse 16, she says, "This is my beloved, and this my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem." So what she does is she describes the characteristic of friendship. He is her friend. And this is another thing we need to ask ourselves before marriage. Is he my friend? Or ask ourselves in marriage, is he my friend? And if we do not have a friendship relationship with our husband or with the man we're thinking about marrying, then we need to examine the situation and we need to think about it, perhaps developing this friendship, because this is a very important quality that husbands and wives share. I have an article here about friendships. It's on a survey on friendship, and what they discovered, the title of this article is "When Husbands Rate Second." They found out that in 69% of all marriages, or people that filled out the survey, I say this survey was in the Family Circle magazine, it says they found that 69% of them said that their husband was not their best friend. It says that their best friend, that they'd rather talk to, was not their spouse. It says women and their friends do a lot of emotional sharing, and it's other women in 69% of these marriages that women say is their best friend, not their husband. And then it says, in describing their relationship with other women, it says, I don't see how any woman who does not have a private line to a psychologist can endure the stress of everyday life without a best friend to talk to. It says, your best friend, you told us, is one of the few people with whom you can be yourself, to whom you can reveal your shortcomings, insecurities, and self-doubts without fear of being judged. She is there for you when the going gets rough. She's the one who cheers you up and cheers you on. Now, this characteristic of a good best friend, a woman best friend, is really a characteristic that, as we're studying the Song of Solomon, is we ought to have this relationship with our husband. He's the one that cheers us up. He's the one that's there for us when the going gets rough. And I think that there's a natural reason why a lot of times that husbands and wives don't have this true friendship. A lot of times young couples start out and they can just talk about anything. But as the marriage goes on, they lose this ability to communicate and to be friends. And part of the reason is just the basic differences between men and women. Women have a gift of gab. They also have a gift for details that drive men crazy. A lot of times when men and women are having conversations, women just tell them every little teeny tiny detail. And their husbands are just so frustrated and so turned off because they are looking at the big picture. They tell their wife, well, go ahead and get to the heart of the issue, or what's the point, whatever it is, they're wanting to focus in on the big picture instead of all these little details. Well, the wife, she's frustrated because she can't share all the details. The husband's frustrated because she's telling him all of these little boring, insignificant things to him, and so there is this communication problem. So what happens is that husbands and wives need to compromise. A woman needs to learn how to talk to a man. She needs to learn how to leave out a lot of little details that keep the home running smooth and keep her life running smooth, but to realize that her husband is focusing in on the big details. So she's going to leave out some things, and her husband is going to have to learn to put up with hearing maybe a few more details than he is interested in. They're going to have to compromise. And what happens is when you have two friends that are looking at life very differently, but they are communicating, a woman has a friend who is helping her get the big picture and to not get bogged down into the little details and losing sight of the big picture. Then the man, he has a friend who is helping him pay attention to details so that he's not overlooking important things while he's looking at the big picture. So husbands and wives need to be best friends. They need to realize that opposites is a good thing and to make it work instead of making it turn their backs on each other. Then they said in this article, it says, the women we pick as our best friend is a lot like us. It says, in our survey, 44% of you said that you are the same age as your closest friend, give or take a year. You live in the same type of community and have the same religious beliefs and marital status. And when asked what three qualities were most important to you in choosing your best friend, half of you picked similar values and beliefs. Other star qualities: respect, easy to talk to, trustworthiness, sense of humor, honesty, loyalty, similar interests, and warmth. And of course, these are all things that we've been seeing in the shepherd. He's been calling her my sister, my bride. They had a similar background. And these are things that ought to belong in a husband and wife relationship. This article went on to talk about how that the friendships that are developing between women in our time right now, it says this is a return to the ways of the 19th century. So in the 19th century, it says back then women had marvelous, rich, elaborated friendships. And it says because so many marriages were arranged, friendship was the only place where true love existed. So back in the 19th century, when their marriages were arranged, they didn't have a true friendship with their husband, then women did have rich relationships with other women. And it says we're going back to that. And it says that's why friendship was passionate and important then. It says now that marriage is so often short-lived, women's friendships have become important once again. Indeed, at a time when 50% of marriages end in divorce, friendships may be the stabler and longer lasting of the two. So what it's saying is by women focusing more on developing friendships with other women, and the article is not against women being friends with other women, it's just talking about who is your best friend. Is your best friend your husband, or is it some woman? In thinking about my husband's and my relationship with each other, I think the thing that I value the very most about our marriage is our friendship. That we can discuss anything with each other. We can discuss areas, I can discuss areas with him where I feel very vulnerable, things that I would not tell any other person, things that I feel are false in myself, I can discuss with him. I know I'm not going to be judged. I know they're not going to be thrown back up at me and used against me, but that we're going to be able to talk about them in a way that's going to find a solution and to find strength. And then he feels that way about me, that he can talk to me in areas where he feels vulnerable, areas that he thinks are his weakness, and he knows that he's not going to be judged. He knows they're not going to be thrown back up at him in an argument. And this is something that we've worked on. It's not something that just happened by chance, but it's something that we've worked on. And to me, that is, if someone says, what's the one thing that is the most important in your marriage, that's what I would say. It is our friendship that we have with each other. And as we continue to think about the effect that husbands and wives have on each other and their relationship with each other, here's Andy Capp talking to a friend. And he tells his friend here, he says, "Don't be too hasty, Albert." He says, "Give your marriage a chance. Things will work out." He says, "Look at me, still with the same woman after all these years." Here's his wife down here. He says, "You're wrong there, mate." And here it is, she's scrubbing the floor, and she says, "I'm not the same woman." So her marriage has had a very detrimental effect on her. It's changed her. She's not the same woman that he's married, even though he thinks it is this way. In fact, there's a little article that illustrates this point. And it talks about how that wives become more like their husbands in long marriages. And this article says, the longer couples stay married, the more likely they are to become like each other, eventually sharing the same thoughts, perceptions, and even math skills. It says, according to a 30-year study. It says, but the ongoing study conducted by a psychology professor in Seattle shows wives are more likely to do the changing than are the husbands. So did you catch that? As longer they're married, the more they become alike. But it's not the men that is changing, it's us, the women, that are changing. It says women who marry men brighter than themselves get brighter, and women who marry losers get worse. And it says this study has been conducted at the University of Washington. And it says in this study that they have administered a battery of psychological and intelligence tests every 7 years to 175 couples. It says 22 of the couples have been tested regularly over the past 30 years, and the rest joined the study 21, 14, and 7 years ago. He says couples tend to quickly adopt each other's personality traits and intellect during the first 7 years of marriage, but then level off for another 7 to 14-year period. As couples get older, after their children have left the nest, they pick up where they left off and become increasingly similar. He says, we have perceived that couples become like each other, but it was just a perception. He says, we see now they start scoring alike on the tests. Even their math ability increases or decreases depending on their spouse. And he says, the study shows that it is more often the wife who changes than the husband. So who we marry is important because it's going to affect us for the rest of our lives and what we become over the years. And as we continue to think about our friendship with our husband, here's a little cartoon where they say, the minister says, as they're getting married, he says, to have and to hold until the going gets tough. Well, while that's supposed to be poking fun at divorces and this sort of thing about marriage, really what it's talking about is something that is very common in marriage. Every marriage has its own set of problems. And in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13 is where it talks about how that we're not tempted above what we can bear, and all of our temptations are common to man. There are a certain number of temptations that are common to man. Just getting married, there's a certain amount of adjustment that needs to be made there. Then in the realm of subjection and leadership, nobody's born knowing how to do either one of these. Husbands and wives have got to work this out. They've got to work out their sexual adjustment. They've got to work out how to get along with their in-laws and then their parents. Then when the first baby comes along, then they've got to start all over again and work out every one of these things again. They've got to work out subjection and leadership in regard to taking care of that baby. Make new sexual adjustments. Perhaps the wife is tired, or perhaps the husband is jealous because of the baby. Maybe have a whole new set of in-law problems because of their attitude towards the grandchild. Then I've got baby here because each baby is different. Each baby can add new problems. One lady was telling me they had 3 kids, had a 4th baby come along later in life, and they were so excited. They said, oh boy, we know about babies. We've had 3. We're going to really enjoy this baby. Well, baby number 4 wasn't like the first 3 babies, had totally different personality, totally different energy level, and they just had to throw out everything they knew and start all over again and learn how to deal with baby number 4. Adolescence brings its problems. Schools and peer pressure bring their problems. Job changes, financial problems, house changes. You may get your dream house, but you may ruin your marriage in the process of getting it. Grandchildren coming along, retirement. There's lots of books written that talk about how the retirement time is the time when the greatest adjustments need to be made, when a man has got time on his hands and he's got time to watch how his woman washes the dishes or washes the clothes and has all this expert advice to give her, causes all kinds of problems. Health problems arise and cause problems and adjustment, and then with the death of a loved one or a spouse, then this also creates problems in a marriage. So as we think about, is he our friend? The way we develop a true friendship is by solving problems together, working on problems together and building this strong bond as we solve problems. So as we have our scene, go back to the Song of Solomon now. We go back to our scene here. She's in her bedroom. She's just woke up. She's had this dream. She's made up her mind. I want to marry the shepherd. The maidens ask her, why would you want to marry the shepherd? And she says, because he's outstanding, because his mouth is full of sweetness, he is wholly desirable, and he is my best friend. Then they ask her, in chapter 6, verse 1, they ask her, where is he? And we're going to see, you're not going to see it tonight, but in our class next week, we're going to start to begin to see it now. This is the actual wedding procession is going to begin. The Jewish wedding customs was that the bridegroom went from his home to where the bride was. He got her and took her back to his home, and that's where the marriage took place, in his home. So she is asking them to go get the shepherd, bring him back, and they're going to start the bridal procession from Solomon's palace back to the shepherd's home, where the marriage will take place at the end of the Song of Solomon. So this is the beginning of the marriage preparation. She has made up her mind. Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 1. She's still there in her bedroom talking to the maidens. And the maidens say, where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you? So tell us where he is, that we can go find him for you. Verse 2, she answers, my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of balsam, to pasture his flock in the gardens and gather lilies. So she's saying, he's a hard-working man, and I know he's out taking care of his sheep. He's dependable. That's where you're going to find him, is in the pasture, taking care of his sheep. So she tells them where to go get him. And then in verse 3, she says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine, he who pastures his flock among the lilies. She uses this expression where she's in verse 3, where she says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. She uses that expression 3 times in the Song of Solomon. One commentator says that he thinks that what she is saying is comparable to 1 Corinthians 7, where it says that a man does not have power over his own body, but a woman does, and a woman doesn't have power over her own body, but a man does. That it takes a man and a woman to satisfy each other. That she's saying, I belong to him and he belongs to me, where they are making this pledge to each other to satisfy each other's desires, that they are pledging themselves to each other. So she says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, he who pastures his flock among the lilies. So what we have is we have her bedroom scene where the maidens have come in to get her ready to see Solomon. She's made up her mind. The shepherd is who she wants, and she sends the maidens away to go get the shepherd, and the curtain closes. And that's where we're going to stop tonight. Okay, what we should have done down here at number 8, chapter 5, verse 8. This is the next day. I skipped over that a while ago. Next day, part 3, scene 1. This is when the maidens are in there talking with her. The first one, she's still in her bedroom, but they're in there helping her get ready. So chapter 5, verse 8 is next day, part 3, scene 1.